My name is Sarah Mitchell. I am 29 years old. 3 weeks ago, my husband and I were standing in the grand ballroom of the Hargrove family estate, surrounded by 200 of his father's closest business associates. It was supposed to be the proudest night of our marriage, the night my husband was officially announced as the next CEO of Hargrove Industries. I was wearing the dress his mother had chosen for me, smiling the way she had coached me to smile, standing exactly where she had told me to stand. And then, right in the middle of his father's speech, a woman I had never seen before walked to the center of that room, looked directly at my husband, and said 4 words that made every single person in that ballroom go completely silent. She said she was carrying his child. Within seconds, the room turned against me. People I had spent 2 years trying to impress looked at me with pity, with disgust, with something even worse, satisfaction. My husband's mother leaned close to my ear and whispered that I should leave quietly before I embarrassed myself further. His father stopped his speech and stood there with an expression I could not read. And the woman, this stranger in a red dress, stood there looking completely calm, like she had rehearsed every word. I could not breathe. I could not speak. I just stood there in the middle of everything falling apart. But then my husband did something that nobody in that room expected. Not his parents, not the guests, not even me. Before I tell you what he did, make sure you subscribe to HeartPath Stories and drop your country in the comments below. We are a community of people who believe that love, when it is real, does not run. Now, let me tell you everything from the beginning. My husband's name is Daniel Hargrove. I met him 4 years ago at a hospital fundraiser where I was volunteering. I was a middle school art teacher from a small town in Ohio. He was the eldest son of one of the most powerful families in Connecticut. I was wearing a borrowed blazer. He was wearing a watch that probably cost more than my car. We talked for 3 hours that night. Not about business or status or money. We talked about his grandmother's garden, about a book we had both read twice, about how he had secretly wanted to be an architect but went into the family company because it was never really a choice. I told him about my students, about the boy in my third period class who had drawn an entire solar system on the back of his math test because he ran out of paper. Daniel laughed at that, a real laugh, not a polished one, and I think that was the moment I stopped seeing him as someone from a different world. He asked for my number before the night ended. I gave it to him thinking he would never call. He called the next morning. We dated for 18 months before he proposed. During that time, I saw very clearly that his family was never going to make this easy. His mother, Patricia Hargrove, was a woman who had spent 40 years building a specific kind of life, and I did not fit the blueprint. She was never openly cruel. That was not her style. She was the kind of woman who complimented your dress and then suggested a tailor, who asked about your family with a smile that made the question feel like an audit, who said things like, "We just want what's best for Daniel," in a tone that made it obvious she did not believe that included me. His father, Richard, was harder to read. He shook my hand firmly at every family dinner, asked me questions about my work, and then seemed to forget I had answered. He was not unkind. He was just completely certain that the world operated in a specific way, and that people like me existed in a different part of it than people like him. Daniel saw all of it. And every time, he would take my hand in the car on the way home and say the same thing. "You are the only person in any room that I actually want to talk to. Don't let them take that from you." I believed him. I still believe he meant it. We got married in a small ceremony, smaller than his family wanted, bigger than mine could afford. Daniel paid for everything without making me feel the weight of it. He introduced me to every guest as my wife, Sarah, with a kind of quiet pride that made my chest ache. We honeymooned in Portugal. We came home to a house he had bought 6 months before the proposal, in a neighborhood close enough to his family that they felt considered, far enough that we had our own life. The first year was honestly beautiful. I kept teaching. He kept working. We had dinner together almost every night. We argued about small things whose turn it was to call the plumber, whether the throw pillows on the couch were functional or decorative, and then laughed about it before bed. I did not spend that year waiting for things to go wrong. I spent it believing that maybe we had actually figured something out. But then Richard Hargrove announced he was stepping back from the company. And everything changed. The moment Daniel's name was put forward as the next CEO, his mother Patricia began looking at me differently, not with more warmth, with more calculation. I started getting invitations to lunches I had never been invited to before lunches, where the other women were the wives of board members and old money families and people whose names were on buildings. I started receiving notes from Patricia suggesting I update my wardrobe, consider a different hairstyle, maybe step back from teaching since the optics of the CEO's wife working a public school salary might send the wrong message to investors. I did not step back from teaching, but I started attending the lunches. I started wearing the clothes that fit the rooms she put me in. I told myself I was doing it for Daniel because he had never asked me to change a single thing, and I did not want his family's disappointment in me to become a weight he had to carry at work. What I did not realize during all those careful adjustments was that Patricia was not trying to shape me into someone acceptable. She was collecting evidence that I would never be. The night of the CEO announcement gala, I was ready 2 hours early. I had spent more time getting dressed than I had ever spent on anything in my life. The gown was midnight blue, chosen by Patricia's stylist. My hair was professionally done. I looked like someone I did not entirely recognize, and I told myself that was okay, that it was just for one night, that Daniel would see me across the room the way he always did, and it would feel like enough. Daniel took my hand when I came downstairs. He looked at me for a long moment and then said, "You are the most beautiful person I have ever seen, and I need you to know that includes every version of you, not just this one." I almost cried. I did not, because Patricia had told me my makeup took 45 minutes and I should not waste it. The ballroom was extraordinary. Everything was gold and white, with tall floral arrangements and a string quartet and the kind of lighting that makes everyone look like they belong in a painting. I moved through the room on Daniel's arm, shaking hands, smiling, saying the right things in the right order. Richard gave a speech about legacy. Daniel's colleagues applauded. His mother watched everything from across the room with an expression of careful satisfaction. I thought we were going to be fine. Richard had just called Daniel to the front of the room to make the official announcement when I noticed a woman near the entrance who did not seem to belong to the event. She was young, close to my age, in a fitted red dress that was slightly wrong for the formality of the room. She was not wearing a name tag. She was not holding a drink. She was standing very still and looking at Daniel with an expression I could not place. Then Richard finished speaking. The room began to applaud, and the woman in the red dress walked forward. She moved through the crowd with a strange kind of steadiness, like someone who had made a decision and was no longer afraid of it. People stepped aside without quite knowing why. She reached the front of the room just as Daniel was about to speak, and she stopped, and she turned, and she looked directly at me. "I'm sorry," she said, loudly enough for the front half of the room to hear. "But before this goes any further, I think his wife deserves to know the truth." The quartet stopped playing. "I am not sure anyone told them to. My name is Vanessa Cole," she said, "and I am 4 months pregnant. The child is Daniel Hargrove's." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Then it broke, and the room erupted into something I can only describe as controlled chaos. Hushed voices, turned heads, the sound of glasses being set down very carefully on tables. Someone near me whispered, "Is this real?" And I could not answer, because I genuinely did not know. I looked at Daniel. His face had gone completely still. Not guilty still. Not caught still. Something else. Something I had never seen before. I looked at Patricia. And this is the part I will never forget for the rest of my life. For just a fraction of a second, before she arranged her face into an expression of shock, I saw something else. Something that looked like relief. "This is outrageous," someone from Daniel's team said, stepping forward. "Security." "I have documentation," Vanessa said calmly, reaching into her small clutch and removing a folded envelope. "A paternity acknowledgement. Signed 3 months ago." She held it up. "I was told to stay quiet. I was told money had been arranged. But I could not watch this man be celebrated while her voice broke, just slightly, just enough while I'm doing this alone." The envelope was taken from her hand by one of Richard's associates. People gathered, people read. Voices rose. And then, Patricia was beside me. Her hand landed on my arm with the careful pressure of someone who has practiced appearing compassionate while delivering devastating news. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I think the kindest thing you can do right now, for everyone, is to step outside. We can have the car brought around. There's no reason for this to become more public than it already is." I looked at her. I looked at the hand on my arm. I looked at the room full of people watching me process the worst moment of my life. "Please," she added, and her eyes were kind in a way that her eyes had never once been kind to me in 2 years. And that is when I knew something was deeply wrong. Not with Daniel. With her. I did not move. I did not step outside. I stood in that ballroom and I waited, because something in the deepest part of me, the part that had survived every careful slight and every smile with a blade behind it, was telling me to stay very, very still. Daniel stepped down from the front of the room. He did not look at Vanessa. He did not look at his parents. He walked straight to me, and he took both of my hands in his. And he looked at me the way he had looked at me the night we met, like I was the only real thing in the room. "I need you to hear me," he said. "Not loudly. Not for the room. Just for me. I have never met that woman before tonight. Daniel." His father's voice came from somewhere behind us. Controlled. Warning. Daniel did not turn around. "I have never met her," he said again. "And I am going to find out exactly what is happening, but I need you to know that before anything else." "The papers," someone said. "Can wait," Daniel said. His mother stepped forward. Her composure was extraordinary. "Daniel, this is not the time for loyalty to become blindness. The evidence." "What evidence?" he said, and now he did turn, slowly. "A piece of paper someone handed to us 20 seconds ago at a party that 200 people were invited to, including people I have never met, including apparently her." He gestured toward Vanessa without looking at her. "That's not evidence. That's a performance." Vanessa's composure flickered. "Just for a moment." "You need to take this seriously," Richard said, and his voice had the weight of a man who was used to ending conversations. "I am taking it seriously," Daniel said. "That's why I'm not reacting the way whoever planned this wanted me to react." The room had gone very quiet again. Patricia's expression shifted. "Barely. But I saw it." "We're leaving," Daniel said. He looked at me. "If you want to." I looked at his mother. She was watching me with an expression I finally understood. She had wanted me to leave quietly before Daniel could say any of this. She had wanted me gone before he could stand next to me in front of 200 witnesses and call the whole thing what it was. "Yes," I said. "Let's go." We walked out of that ballroom together. Behind us, I heard Richard's voice, tight with something I had never heard in it before. Not anger. Alarm. And Patricia saying his name in a low, urgent tone, the same way you say someone's name when you need them to stop talking. The drive home was quiet for the first few miles. Then Daniel pulled over on a dark stretch of road and put the car in park and sat there for a moment with his hands on the wheel. "Tell me what you're thinking," I said. "I'm thinking," he said carefully, "that my mother knew that woman's name." I turned to look at him. When Vanessa said her name, he said, "My mother did not react. Everyone else did. Even my father. But my mother, she had already heard it before tonight." We sat with that for a moment. "I'm also thinking," he said, "that my mother was the one who handled the guest list." I did not sleep that night. Daniel was on his phone until almost 4 in the morning, talking to people I didn't know, texting in a way that looked less like panic and more like someone pulling on a specific thread. I lay in our bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about the look on Patricia's face that fraction of a second before the mask came back. He found the thread within 72 hours. I do not know everyone he spoke to or every favor he called in. What I know is that on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 days after the gala, he came home early and sat across from me at the kitchen table with an expression I had never seen on him, not anger, not devastation, but a specific kind of grief that belongs only to the moment when someone you love becomes someone you have to grieve. Vanessa Cole had been introduced to Patricia Hargrove 11 weeks earlier through a mutual contact, a woman who moved in Patricia's social circles and was known for being useful in delicate situations. Vanessa was a struggling actress with real medical debt and a complicated financial history. She was not pregnant. The documentation had been prepared by a lawyer who had done quiet work for the Hargrove family before, though never anything like this. The plan was not new. It had been discussed in careful language over several weeks, in messages that Daniel now had copies of. The goal was never to permanently destroy Daniel's reputation. The goal was to destroy our marriage in a single, public, irreversible moment, to give Daniel a reason to leave me that would feel like his own decision, and to give the family a clean path to pair him with a woman they had already selected, the daughter of a board member whose company merger would benefit the Hargroves significantly. I sat across from my husband in our kitchen and listened to all of this and felt something very strange, not the devastation I expected. Something quieter and more permanent. "What do you want to do?" I asked. He looked at me for a long time. "I want to go tell them," he said, "that we know. And then I want to watch my father look my mother in the face." We went together. We did not call ahead. We drove to the estate on a Thursday evening when we knew both of them would be home, and Daniel used his key, and we walked into the sitting room where his parents were having evening drinks by the fireplace, as though nothing in the world was wrong. Patricia stood when she saw us. Something moved behind her eyes, a calculation, running fast. "Daniel, sit down, Mom," he said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. He laid everything on the coffee table between them. The messages, the connection to the lawyer, the record of payment to Vanessa Cole, the contact through the mutual acquaintance, every piece of thread he had pulled. Richard looked at the papers for a long time without speaking. Then he looked at his wife. Patricia did not look at the papers. She looked at me. "You have to understand," she said, and her voice was very controlled, very measured, the voice of someone who had decided that explanation was still possible. "The merger alone represents—" "Stop," Daniel said. She stopped. "I'm not here to negotiate," he said. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here because you are my parents and you deserve to hear this from me directly." Richard set the papers down. His jaw was tight. "Son, I loved you both," Daniel said. And the past tense landed in that room like something breaking. "I spent my entire life trying to be what this family needed. I took the job I didn't choose. I went to the schools you chose. I went to every dinner and every event and every obligation." He paused. "The one thing I chose for myself was Sarah. And you tried to take her from me with a lie you constructed over months. You paid someone to stand in front of 200 people and humiliate my wife." Patricia's composure finally cracked, not into remorse, into desperation. "Everything we did was for you. For this family. You don't build something like what your grandfather started by letting emotion." "Mom." His voice was gentle. "That was the most devastating part. I'm not angry. I want you to understand that. I'm just done." She stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm resigning from the company on Monday. It means we won't be at Christmas. It means that if you want to know your grandchildren someday, if we're lucky enough to have them, that will be something we revisit when significant time has passed and things look different than they do right now." Richard stood up. "You cannot walk away from everything your grandfather—" "Watch me," Daniel said, quietly. Finally, we left. We drove home. We did not speak for most of the drive, not because there was nothing to say, but because some things require silence before they can become words. At a red light, Daniel reached over and took my hand. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry it took something this big for me to do what I should have done 2 years ago." "What would you have done 2 years ago?" I asked. "Chosen you earlier," he said. And louder. What happened after that was slower and less dramatic than the night that broke everything open, but it mattered more. Daniel did resign on Monday. It was quiet, legally clean, and final. He had built enough of his own professional credibility over 6 years that 3 separate firms reached out within the first week. He took a position 4 months later that was smaller, had a shorter title, and made him more genuinely happy than he had been in years. Vanessa Cole did not face legal consequences. Daniel chose not to pursue it after she came forward voluntarily and provided a full account of what she had been asked to do and by whom. I will not pretend that felt fair. It did not, entirely. But it provided the documentation that mattered, and Daniel believed she had been used by people with far more power than she had. The lawyer faced a bar complaint. I do not know how it resolved. I know that Richard, to his complicated credit, did not protect him. Patricia called me once, about 6 weeks after everything. I picked up because I was curious what she would say. She did not apologize, not exactly. She said she hoped someday I would understand that she had wanted something for her son that she now understood she was wrong about. I told her I did understand what she wanted. I just thought she had confused wanting what was best for him with wanting what was best for her version of him. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's fair. I was not expecting that." We did not become close after that call. But I kept it because I think it was the most honest thing she ever said to me. Daniel and I celebrated our second anniversary 6 months after the gala. Not in a ballroom. Not with 200 people. We went back to Portugal, to the same small town where we had honeymooned, and ate dinner at an outdoor table where the tablecloths were plastic and the wine was cheap and wonderful and nobody knew who his father was. He looked across the table at me and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm happy." And I meant it in a way I had not entirely meant it the first time. Because that first time, the happiness had lived next to a fear I had not named yet, the fear that all of it could be taken from me by people who had decided I did not deserve it. That fear was gone now. Not because everything had worked out simply, but because I had watched my husband stand in the middle of the most important night of his professional life and choose me without hesitating, and then spend 72 hours proving he was right to, and then walk away from his inheritance and his family legacy and his entire future as it had been planned without once asking me if it was worth it. He already knew it was worth it. The people who tried to take it all apart did not understand the one thing that made their plan impossible from the start. They were trying to use a lie to break something that had been built out of exactly the opposite. And you cannot dissolve something real with something false, no matter how official the paperwork looks, or how carefully you time the moment, or how many people are watching. You just can't. If you're listening to this and you're in a relationship where someone keeps telling you that you don't belong, that your background is wrong, that you don't fit, that the person who loves you will eventually see what they supposedly see, I need you to hear something. The people who love you do not need to be convinced that you are worth it. They already know, and the people trying to convince them otherwise are not protecting anyone. They are just afraid of what they cannot control. Thank you for being here and listening to my story. If this reached you, please share it with someone who needs it today. I'll see you in the next one.